You'll never be welcome here." Sarah's words cracked like a whip down the hallway, sending a tremor through my entire body. I froze, clutching the warm soup pot, feeling the heat leach away, just like the blood from my face. "If you can't learn your place, don't bother coming back," she continued, her eyes spitting fire. Behind her, I could see my little grandson, Theo, all of 3 years old, peeking from the kitchen, chocolate crumbs clinging to his mouth, utterly bewildered. Sarah's mother, Helen, watched, a smug, knowing smirk playing on her lips, as if savoring a long-awaited spectacle. With trembling hands, I set the soup pot on the hall table. The quiet clang of aluminum against wood was a funeral bell for something precious, now gone. "I just wanted to help," I mumbled, my voice a ghost. "Grandma Carol leaving?" Theo's tiny voice reached me, twisting the knife in my gut. I couldn't answer. I just turned my back and walked out, closing the door softly, still afraid of disturbing them even then. It wasn't until I reached my car, parked out on the curb in front of the house I'd visited countless times, that the tears finally came. Thick, hot, unstoppable. You're probably wondering how a 67-year-old finds herself here. How a family that seemed so solid could just crumble apart so abruptly. But the truth is, no structure collapses overnight. The cracks appear like hairline fractures, almost imperceptible, until one day the entire foundation gives way. Let me tell you how it all started. My name is Carol Miller. I've been a widow for 22 years. I raised my only son, Chris, alone since he was 12, when my husband, Arthur, passed away from a sudden heart attack. Back then, I turned my grief into grit. I worked as a secretary by day and a seamstress by night, patching clothes, patching our lives together. I pinched every penny, poured it into his future, making sure Chris got a good education. When he got into engineering school, I wept, silent and fierce in the bathroom, bursting with pride. My boy, so brilliant, so driven. He had Arthur's quiet determination, and my soft heart. Or so I believed. Chris met Sarah in his last year of college. She was studying architecture, and they connected during an interdisciplinary project. I remember it vividly, the day he brought her home for dinner for the very first time. Sarah was beautiful, with long brown hair and a smile that seemed to pour light into every corner. She even brought me flowers. Yellow tulips, my favorites. How had she known? Chris, my thoughtful boy, must have mentioned it. "Mrs. Miller," she chirped, embracing me like an old confidant. "Chris talks about you constantly. I feel like I've known you for years." That night, as I served the dinner I'd poured my heart into, a rich, savory pot roast, just as my own mother had taught me, I watched how Sarah looked at my son. Love, raw and undeniable, pulsed between them. And when she offered to help me in the kitchen after dinner, I thought to myself, my Chris has found his match. The wedding happened 2 years later, a simple, deeply meaningful ceremony. I poured every last cent of my savings into that reception. "Mom, you really don't have to," Chris had protested, but my resolve was unshakable. I wanted their day to be perfect. "You're the only real mother I have now," Sarah confided on her wedding day, her eyes brimming. Her own mother, Helen, divorced and distant, made an appearance, then vanished as quickly as she'd arrived. "I've always longed for a mother like you," she added, her voice barely a whisper. Those words settled deep within me, filling a void I hadn't known since Chris was small. The profound ache of being needed, of having a purpose beyond my own solitary existence. When Theo was born 3 years ago, My happiness felt boundless. A grandson, the living legacy of our small family. The first time I held him in my arms, so impossibly small and perfect, a silent vow formed. I would be the best grandma on earth. And I devoted myself to it. I went to their house 3 times a week to help out. I'd arrive laden with homemade meals and frozen casseroles, easing the burden of their busy lives. I spent hours rocking Theo, changing diapers, crooning the same old lullabies I'd sung to Chris. When they needed a night out, I'd babysit, relishing the chance to contribute. "What would we do without you, Mom?" Chris would murmur, pressing a kiss to my forehead before he and Sarah slipped out for their rare evenings alone. Sunday dinners became a cherished tradition. I'd arrive early, help prep the food, play with Theo. We were a family, or so I fiercely believed. The first changes whispered into existence. A missed Sunday, a postponed visit, small, isolated incidents at first. "We're just so swamped, Mom." Chris would sigh into the phone. "Next week, definitely." But the following week only brought fresh rationalizations. Theo had a sniffle. Sarah, a crushing deadline. The car, a flat tire. I started noticing other things too. When I'd suggest a different brand of baby food for Theo, Sarah would offer a tight, polite smile, then discard it the moment my back was turned. When I'd tidy up his toys a certain way, she'd meticulously rearrange everything the second I was gone. Once, I arrived earlier than planned and overheard Sarah on the phone in the kitchen. "I can't stand it anymore, Mom. She's always here, always hovering, always offering suggestions. As if I don't know how to raise my own son." I froze in the doorway, heart hammering against my ribs. Was she talking about me? The same woman who'd called me Mom, with such heartfelt warmth? That day, I feigned ignorance. A momentary lapse, I told myself. We all have those moments, don't we? But the moments stretched into days, then weeks. Phone calls became curt. Invitations, a distant memory. Until that fateful Thursday, driven by a desperate longing, I paid them a surprise visit. After that night, Sarah yelled at me. I spent a whole week in sleepless, haunted nights. I kept rewinding every interaction, dissecting every piece of advice, every spontaneous hug with Theo. Had I overstepped? Been too much? Had my love, once so boundless, become a suffocating weight? On the morning of the 7th day, the phone rang. It was Chris. My heart jolted. A flicker of hope ignited. An apology for Sarah's outburst. An invitation home. "Mom?" His voice was a hollow echo sounding miles away. Not a mere 15 minutes. "Chris, honey, it's so good to hear you." There was a pause, pregnant with unspoken dread. "Mom, Sarah's been overwhelmed with work. We think it's best to pause the visits for a bit. We'll let you know when it's convenient." Convenient. The word hit me like a physical blow, a cold stone in my gut. "Convenient?" I repeated, incredulous. "Your son is my grandson, Chris. Not a damn business meeting you slot in when it suits your calendar. Please, Mom, don't make this impossible." "Harder for who? Chris? For you?" You can't even tell me what's really happening. For Sarah, who clearly wants me gone? Or for Theo, who's losing the only grandma who loves him? A choked silence. Then, a ragged sigh. "Mom, you know I love you. But I have to put my family first now." His family. A cruel distinction, as if I were somehow outside its circle. As if all those years raising him alone, pouring my very being into his life, meant absolutely nothing. "Understand?" I echoed, the word a bitter taste. "I understand nothing." "When you're ready to speak honestly, You know my number. I hung up the phone and sank onto the couch. The air knocked from my lungs. The house had never felt so vast, so deafeningly silent. On the walls, photos of Chris's milestones. His graduation, his wedding, baby Theo nestled in my arms. They mocked me, belonging to a life that had suddenly, inexplicably, vanished. In the days that followed, I tried to keep a routine. I'd wake up, have coffee, fuss over the already spotless house, watch TV shows, the screen a blur. Sometimes I'd pick up the phone to call them, but I'd hang up before dialing. Pride, perhaps. Or perhaps a deeper, colder fear that his voice would confirm I was now merely a burden. I started seeing photos of Theo on social media, zoo trips, birthday parties. Theo's life unfolding without me, glimpsed through cold, digital windows. I was a stranger to his joy now. I sent gifts through the mail, a bright red fire truck, one he'd squealed about the last time I saw his face. A storybook for Chris to read, just as I'd read to him every night. No thanks ever came. It was a Thursday afternoon, 3 months to the day after that devastating visit, when I ran into Margaret at the grocery store. We'd worked together at the accounting firm for almost 2 decades before we both retired. She was in the produce section, selecting apples with the same precise care she'd applied to tax forms for 20 years. "Carol! My goodness, look at you!" she exclaimed, her arms already wide open. "It's been ages." We talked right there, amidst the earthy scent of the produce aisle. She asked about Chris, about Theo. I told her about the estrangement, the words catching, a knot tightening in my throat. "Oh, Carol," she murmured, her warm, wrinkled hands closing over mine. My daughter pulled a similar stunt when she married. What I learned is this: you can't dictate how others treat you, but you can choose your response. "And how did you respond?" I asked, a drowning woman clutching at a lifeline. "By building a life that made me happy, independent of them, when they finally saw me happy on my own. Curiously, they started wanting back in." Her words stayed with me as I drove home, the weight of the grocery bags negligible compared to the enormity of her words. Building a life that made me happy. At 67, after a lifetime spent tending to others' joy, could I possibly learn to cultivate my own? That night, instead of another lonely meal facing a blank television, I did something different. I pulled out an old dusty notebook and began to jot down all the things I'd always wanted to do, but never had the time for. Learn to paint, see the ocean again, take an Italian cooking class, join a book club. I looked at that list, and for the first time in months, a fragile, defiant spark of hope ignited deep within me. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe it was finally time for me. The very next day, I enrolled in a painting class at the senior center. A week later, I joined the public library's book club. I met new people, people who saw me not as Chris's mom or Theo's grandma, but simply as Carol, a woman with her own thoughts, her own dreams, her own untold stories. I painted my very first picture, a sunset seen from my kitchen window. Far from perfect, certainly, but irrevocably, defiantly, mean. I hung it up in the living room, replacing the faded wedding photo of Chris and Sarah that had hung there for years. December arrived, draped in twinkling lights, yet also cloaked in the holiday season's inevitable melancholy. This would be the first Christmas in 35 years I'd face without my son. The ache, of course, lingered. Some nights I still cried, clutching my pillow, aching for Theo's small warm hugs, for Chris's familiar, easy laugh. But now new threads were weaving themselves into the fabric of my days. I decided to send them Christmas cards. No expectations, no unspoken resentments. Just a simple card. Its message heartfelt, open. Dear Chris, Sarah, and Theo. Wishing you a Christmas filled with love and joy. My door and my heart are always open, whenever you're ready. With love, Mom Chua Grandma Carol. I dropped the cards in the mail with no illusions. It was my way of saying the quiet truth. My heart remained open. What I didn't expect was for the phone to ring the day after Christmas, a jarring, hopeful sound, and for the voice on the other end to be the one I'd yearned for. Mom! Chris's voice sounded different. Less brittle, more recognizably him. Theo misses you, he said, the words a gentle plea. Can we come over this Sunday? I stood suspended in silence, letting the words settle, my heart a frantic drumbeat. Of course, honey, I finally managed. I would love nothing more. When I hung up, I realized I was actually smiling. It wasn't an ending, not remotely. So much remained unspoken, so much still festered. But it was a beginning, a tentative, fragile new start. And as I looked at my sunset painting on the wall, I thought maybe Margaret was right. Sometimes you have to step away to find a new path back. Not to the old familiar, but to a new space where dignity could thrive. Sunday loomed, a blank page ready for a new narrative. But what would happen when they got here? What would I say to Sarah after the raw wounds her words had carved? And Chris, who had made his choice, standing by her, away from me. Was any of us truly ready? Only time would tell. But one thing I knew for sure, the Carol they'd encounter wouldn't be the shattered woman they'd left behind. That night the doors had slammed shut. When they arrived that Sunday, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I opened the door, and there was Theo, his eyes bright, a sunburst of a smile illuminating the entire hallway. "Grandma Carol!" he shrieked, launching himself into my arms as if no time, no distance, had ever separated us. I hugged him tight, feeling his warm little body against mine, the sweet, familiar scent of his shampoo and his soft brown hair. For a moment, I just closed my eyes and let myself feel only that. The pure, unburdened love only a child knows how to give. "I brought you a picture," he said, holding out a crumpled, colorful drawing. 2 stick figures, one large, one small, holding hands. "It's you and me," he explained with 3-year-old certainty. "Mommy helped me write your name." I looked over Theo's head and saw Sarah standing in the doorway, clutching a modest gift bag. Her face was tense, but gone was the cold anger from our last encounter. In its place, something akin to embarrassment, or perhaps raw regret, flickered. I couldn't quite decipher it. Chris stood beside her, hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels, a nervous habit he'd carried since boyhood. "Come in, please." I gestured them in, stepping back. They entered tentatively, like strangers entering hallowed ground, not the vibrant home Chris had known his whole life. Their eyes swept the room, cataloging the subtle shifts. The paintings from my classes now decorated the walls. Books, dog-eared and well-loved, lay scattered across the coffee table. Our book club was currently lost in 100 Years of Solitude. A vibrant, newly crocheted throw draped the old sofa. "Your house is changed, Mom," Chris murmured, pausing before one of my canvases. A landscape of the old park, our childhood haunt. "You painted this?" he asked, genuine surprise softening his face. "Yes," I replied, a quiet hum of pride blooming within me. "It's a new hobby, started a few months back. It's beautiful," he said, and for a moment I saw in his eyes that earnest boy who'd once run to me, clutching clumsy crayon drawings. Sarah approached, extending the gift bag she clutched. "We brought cake," she offered, her voice barely audible. "Almond, I remembered you liked that." I accepted the gift. Our fingers brushed, a fleeting electric contact. "Thank you. I'll put on some coffee." In the kitchen, as I began setting out afternoon tea, I felt someone behind me. It was Sarah. "Can I help?" she asked, standing in the doorway as if hesitant to cross a newly drawn line. "Of course," I replied, nodding toward the cabinet where the mugs hung. "Could you grab those, please?" We worked in silence for a few minutes, the quiet hum of the coffee maker and Theo's bright giggles echoing from the living room, where Chris had unearthed a dusty box of his own childhood treasures. "Carol," Sarah started, her voice a fragile tremor. "That day, I lifted a hand, a gentle blockade. "Not right now, Sarah." "But I need to," she insisted, her voice gaining a fragile strength as she set down the last cup. What I said, my behavior, it was unforgivable. I looked at her, truly saw her. Something shifted inside me. The dark smudges beneath her eyes, the slump in her shoulders, the raw exhaustion etched on her face. She looked utterly crushed by an unseen burden. "Are you all right?" The question escaped me, unbidden. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes welled, and she turned abruptly to fuss with the napkins, desperate to hide the sudden flood. "It's been a lot," she finally whispered, her voice tight. "Work, the house, Theo. It feels like I'm failing at all of it." In that moment, something unlocked within me. A quiet, profound understanding. I remembered myself, decades ago, balancing mother and father for Chris, bone-tired, overwhelmed, haunted by the fear of falling short. "I understand," I said softly. "More than you know." That afternoon, we navigated a strange new landscape, familiar in outline, but profoundly altered. We talked about superficial things while Theo played on the living room rug. The weather, my painting class, Chris's new work project. We artfully skirted the elephant in the room. The months of stony silence, the harsh, unforgiving words, the gaping chasm that had swallowed us whole. When they were leaving, Theo clutched me in a fierce hug, already asking when he could come back. Sarah, to my surprise, promised him, "Next Sunday, sweetie." Chris pressed a kiss to my forehead, a ghost of old affection. "You look strong, Mom," he said, a curious mix of relief and surprise in his tone. "I am good," I replied genuinely. "I've learned my happiness is my own to cultivate, not dependent on anyone, not even on you." I saw something pass through his eyes. Recognition? Or was it perhaps the quiet sting of guilt? He nodded slightly and left, holding Theo's hand. When I closed the door, I didn't cry like I thought I would. Instead, I felt a strange peace. Something had undeniably shifted that afternoon. Yet I knew the path to true reconciliation would be arduous, fraught with old hurts. The following week, an unexpected text popped up from Sarah, a tentative invitation. "Lunch? Just us?" I confess my first instinct was to refuse. The sting of rejection, the echo of harsh words, still raw. But a quiet voice, perhaps that burgeoning, self-assured Carol, urged me forward. We met at a small cafe near her office. Sarah was already seated, nervously tracing patterns on a teacup. "Thanks for coming," she offered, her voice barely steady as I settled into the chair. "I admit," I said, "I was surprised." She took a deep breath as if bracing herself. Carol, there's something I need to tell you. It might explain everything. I waited, feeling the air hum with the weight of unspoken truths, a precipice we were about to cross. I've been in therapy, she continued, her gaze unwavering now. For a couple of months. And, well, it's unearthed some painful things about my own mother. That stopped me cold. Helen, Sarah's mother, was a phantom presence in their lives. She'd materialized for major events, then fade away just as swiftly. I knew their bond was tenuous, but I'd never guessed at the chasm beneath. My therapist helped me realize that I have issues with maternal figures, she explained, her voice thick with unshed tears. My mom was always absent when I needed her, truly needed her. She was off building a new life, wrapped up in a new husband. I grew up feeling like I was never a priority to her. And then, when I met you, Carol, it was like finding the mother I'd always craved. You were everything I'd ever wished for. Present, loving, there. And then, I began to resent it. Resenting you for being everything my own mother hadn't been. I piled impossible expectations on myself, to be as perfect as you seemed. And when I inevitably fell short, the anger festered. At myself, at Chris, and yes, at you. The words hung, heavy and raw, a dam finally bursting. All this time I thought she hated me, thought I'd failed her somehow. But it wasn't hate. It was a twisted kind of admiration, curdled by her own pain. "Oh, Sarah," I said, reaching across the table and enclosing her trembling hand in mine. "Honey, no one is perfect, especially not as a mother. We all stumble, we all fall. I certainly have." Sarah's eyes brimming with fresh tears. "But you always seemed so composed, so invincible," and I felt utterly adrift. And then, when you said those words, that night, about me, taking your son, it just cemented every fear. That I was a failure, as a daughter, a wife, and now a mother, keeping Theo from the grandma who loved him. That night I was wounded, I admitted, my voice a quiet rasp. I was terrified. I felt utterly displaced, and I lashed out, said things I deeply, profoundly regret, things that were unforgivable to you, to Chris, to our family. I was afraid of losing everything I held dear. Sarah nodded, a tear tracking down her cheek. "I understand that now. My therapist helped me see that my reaction was also about my own past. It was never truly you. I projected my entire painful history onto you. And Carol, I am so sorry. For all of it." "And I'm sorry too, Sarah," I echoed, "for not seeing your pain sooner. For not being the mother-in-law you could lean on. I was too consumed by my own hurt." We sat in silence for a moment, our hands still linked across the table, the air thrumming with unspoken apologies, a fragile, new understanding blossoming. The cafe's din receded to a distant hum. It was no magic wand. It wouldn't erase the jagged months of pain, or the brutal words. But it was a monumental shift. We talked for another hour, not about the raw wounds, but the gentle ebb and flow of daily life. Theo's latest antics, the universal juggle of work and family. A profound lightness settled over us, as if an oppressive cloak had been lifted from both our shoulders. When we finally stood to leave, Sarah hugged me, a genuine, warm embrace, not the polite, distant kind. "Thank you, Carol," she whispered, "for seeing me, for hearing me." And I knew she truly meant it. From that day, the current began to shift. Sarah and I forged a new ritual. Weekly coffee, just the two of us. Sometimes we talked about the big things, sometimes about nothing at all. And brick by painstaking brick, the wall between us began to crumble. Chris noticed, of course. He saw the shift in Sarah, the newfound lightness in her step. He saw the change in me too. We started having Sunday dinners again. Not every week, but often enough. Always something warm and grounding, pot roast or a bubbling pasta bake. Theo would burst through the door shrieking, "Grandma Carol!" And laughter, so long absent, would once again fill the rooms. The laughter that had been missing for so long. I remember one Sunday, not long after that lunch with Sarah. We were all at the table, a gleaming, perfectly roasted chicken at its center. Chris was carving. Theo's chatter a constant hum, and Sarah, bless her, actually laughing. At one of Chris's truly terrible jokes. I looked around, really taking it all in. The air heavy with rosemary and lemon. The gentle clink of forks on plates. The low, comforting hum of intertwined voices. It wasn't the past. It couldn't be. We were all irrevocably changed. But it was ours again. A precious, redesigned ours. It was a long process. Years truly to mend those deep old fissures. Still, the old insecurities would sometimes creep in. Moments when that familiar pang of exclusion would strike. But then I'd catch sight of my sunset painting on the wall, or feel the cool weight of a new canvas in my hands, or recall the quiet, hard-won understanding shared over tea with Sarah. And I'd know, with absolute certainty. I wasn't just Chris's mom or Theo's grandma anymore. I was Carol, a woman who, at 67, was still discovering, still expanding, still painting her own vibrant landscape. My home remained my sanctuary, but now, my life felt like its own true masterpiece. And that, I realized, was utterly gloriously enough. 6 months had passed since that fateful night Sarah yelled that I would never be welcome in her home. Today we are all gathered to celebrate Theo's 4th birthday. The house is full. Daycare friends, neighbors, Chris and Sarah's co-workers. Helen, Sarah's mother, is also here, chatting animatedly about her recent trip to Europe. I observe from afar how Sarah interacts with her. Polite, but distant. Some wounds take longer to heal. Some, perhaps, never heal completely. Theo runs up to me, proudly showing off the present he just received. A junior scientist kit. "Grandma Carol, will you help me with the experiments?" "Of course, my love. How about we start next weekend?" He agrees enthusiastically and runs back to his friends. Chris approaches, holding a glass of soda. "He's so excited about that kit," he comments, sitting beside me. "Remember how I also love those things?" "How could I forget? You turned our kitchen into a lab when you were 10. That baking soda mixture almost ruined the ceiling." We laugh together at the memory. There's a new lightness between us, a complicity that had been lost. "Mom," he says, suddenly serious, "I never properly thanked you." "For what?" "For everything. For being both a mom and a dad to me. For working so hard to give me an education. For never giving up, even when things got tough." I feel my eyes well up. "You don't need to thank me, son." "Yes, I do," he insists. "And I also need to apologize for letting you be pushed out of our lives, for not being strong enough to prevent it. You were trying to protect your family." "You are my family too," he says, holding my hand. "Always have been. Always will be." At that moment, Sarah approaches with a piece of cake. "I saved the first slice for you, Carol. I know you like the part with the most frosting." I accept the plate with a smile. It is a small gesture, but full of meaning. She sits on the other side, forming a circle with Chris and me. I've been thinking, she begins hesitantly. Theo will start full-time school next month. I was also thinking of going back to full-time work. That's great, I reply. You missed your work, didn't you? She nods. Very much, but I'm worried about the hours. Sometimes I'll have to stay longer at the office. And Chris also has complicated days. If you need help with Theo, just let me know, I offer. But immediately add, on days that work for you, of course. I also have my schedule now. Painting classes on Tuesdays, reading group on Thursdays. Sarah smiles. Actually, I was thinking of something more regular. Maybe you could pick him up from school on Mondays and Wednesdays. Take him to your house until Chris or I get off work. The proposal takes me by surprise. It's more than a request for help. It's an invitation to be part of their routine again, in a structured and respectful way. I would love that, I reply, feeling a wave of gratitude. Great, she says, looking relieved. And maybe you could teach me how to make that vegetable soup he loves so much. I've tried a few times, but it never tastes like yours. Of course, anytime. Chris watches our interaction with a discreet smile. I know what he's thinking, that we finally found a balance, a new way of being a family. Later, as the party is ending, and guests begin to say goodbye, I find Sarah in the kitchen, putting away leftovers. It was a beautiful party, I comment, helping her organize the containers. Thanks for helping. I couldn't have done it without you. We work in comfortable silence for a few minutes, a rhythm that would have been unthinkable months ago. You know, she finally says, my therapist says I'm making progress, that I'm learning to separate my issues with my mom from my relationships with other women in my life. I'm happy to hear that. I still have a lot of work ahead of me, she admits. There will be tough days when I might react badly, pull back. We all have our tough days, I reply. The important thing is that now we can talk about it. Set healthy boundaries. She looks at me with an expression I can't quite decipher. Gratitude mixed with something deeper. Thanks for not giving up on us, Sarah finally says. Family doesn't give up, I reply simply. As I drive home that night, I reflect on the journey of the past few months. The sting of that rejection still exists, somewhere deep inside me. It probably always will. Some words, once said, can't be completely erased. But around that pain, something new grew. A deeper understanding, a more honest relationship, a mutual respect that wasn't there before. I learned that family love isn't perfect. It's complicated, sometimes painful, always evolving. I learned that we need boundaries, all of us, so that love can breathe and grow healthy. More importantly, I learned that my worth doesn't diminish because someone can't see it in a moment of pain or confusion. That I can be a mother, a grandmother, and still be Carol, with my own dreams, interests, and needs. When I get home, I notice the sunset painting on the living room wall, my first painting. Next to it, there are now others. A park landscape, a vase of flowers, an unfinished portrait of Theo. Evidence of a life that continues to expand, to grow in new directions. That painful night taught me that sometimes we need to step away to find a new path back, not to the same place, but to a place where we can exist with dignity. A place where love doesn't mean sacrifice or annihilation, but mutual respect and acceptance. I don't know what the future holds for our family. I only know that whatever it is, we will face it together. Not as perfect fairy tale characters, but as real, imperfect people, trying to do the best they can with the love they have. And in the end, perhaps that's what really matters. Not the absence of conflicts or wounds, but the courage to remain open to each other, even after the pain. The willingness to build bridges over the chasms that sometimes open between us. The faith that, even on the darkest nights, the sun always rises again, painting the sky with colors we never imagined possible.